Hello, welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket with me, Simon Hughes.
And I'm Simon Mann.
Today is the 16th of April. We're in a little break between county championship rounds. We're going to talk a bit about that in due course. But I'm going to start with a question. Of course, we're still in the football season, I'm afraid. There's only about 2 weeks in between football seasons, isn't there, eventually? But football, I was watching the Champions League last night, some exciting games going on there. Arsenal have made it through to the semis, etc. Anyway, here's a question for you, a football question. I know you're a football man. Sir Bobby Charlton's last league game for Manchester United was away to Chelsea in April 1973, 53 years ago. Which England cricketer played in that last league match for Manchester United with Bobby Charlton? So was it Paul Allott, Arnie Sidebottom, Eddie Hemmings, Graham Stevenson, or Chris Balderstone?
I know the answer to this. I actually was going to give you the answer before you gave me 5 options. It's Arnie Sidebottom, surely, isn't it?
It is. It is. Very good. Congratulations. Round of applause.
Oh, there we go. Quiz question to get us
Arnie
underway
Sidebottom
today.
played 21 times for Manchester United and also for Huddersfield Town and Halifax Town. And, of course, he played for England in the 1985 Ashes. And he played with Bobby Charlton in his last league game in 1973. Amazing. Don't get that now, do you? Cricketers playing football in the winter, certainly not professionally anyway.
Well, they're not allowed to, are they? I think clubs take a dim view of it. Well, there's 2 reasons. One, because there's not enough time. As you say, there's not enough time between the football season and the cricket season and into the new football season. Also, because clubs are very concerned about their players getting broken hands or whatever. Playing cricket, broken fingers or strains or side strains or what have you. Look, okay. Quiz question to start with. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Ben Stokes' interview on the ECB website. We're going to hear a little bit of that and discuss some of the things that he said. We're also going to talk about substitutions, which is one of the hot topics of the day, and see where we stand on that and what could be done to head off some of the early criticisms of the new substitution rule in the county championship. But first things first, you said you were watching some Champions League football last night, Yoz. You were also at the Middlesex AGM. Now, AGMs, they sound quite boring, don't they? Normally, they are a bit dull often. But last night, there was a lot of anger within Middlesex cricket, isn't it, at the moment, about the way things are going on and off the field. So potential for a febrile atmosphere last night. Was it a febrile atmosphere? Was there revolution in the air? Was there much anger in the air last night?
I think there was revolution in the air. I think that the chairman, Richard Sykes, pacified it quite effectively, actually. And I mean, chairmen of counties have an invidious task, really. A lot of them are voluntary, as is Richard. They don't get paid for their work, and they are, it's almost 24/7 trying to sort of extricate counties from financial problems or, manage their playing staffs or whatever. I mean, and obviously pacify members as well who are agitated. In the case of Middlesex, the membership, it's about 7,000, just under 7,000 members. Obviously, they weren't all there last night. I'd say there was probably 500 or 600 maybe in the Thomas Lord Suite above the tavern at Lord's. And I got my Middlesex sweater on the wall behind me there. I mean, it was one of the great counties, wasn't it? I mean, I'm not trying to claim any credit for that, but in the 1980s, we won 4 county championship titles, and in all, we've won 11 outright and 2 shared, so 13 titles. Only 2 counties, Yorkshire and Surrey, have won more. And so, it had that image of one of the great counties in the olden days, didn't it?
Indeed, yeah. You won, just to correct you won 3 titles in the 1980s and 1 in 1990. Ever the pedant, Yoz, but there we go. Right. So why are the natives restless?
Well, I mean, obviously performance is one thing. So Middlesex are still in the second division, and they have been for a while, having won the championship in 2017. Ever since then, really, they've struggled. 2016, sorry. Ever since then, they've struggled, was relegated the following year, and then have sort of been up and down a little bit since, and mostly in the second division. And it feels the wrong place for a county that plays at Lord's and so on. So, that's one issue. They have the worst T20 record of any team in the world, any domestic professional team in the world, which is obviously not something to write home about. And I think also seeing what's going on behind the scenes. So, one chief executive, Andrew Cornish, who had been at Somerset, and he is now suspended for his conduct, which is being investigated by the cricket regulator. No more details on that, what he's allegedly supposed to have done, but he's on suspension at the moment, and the county is being managed by a member of the MCC board instead, as a sort of temporary move. So, without a chief executive, and understandably, the members are pretty agitated about what's going on. Why is there a constant problem with finances? They were punished by the ECB last year for financial mismanagement, and it doesn't get much better. This year, they announced the accounts that there was a loss, only a small loss actually, of 120,000 over the year, but the prospects for the county falling into a worse financial position are quite serious. The potential for the county to slump into the red is quite real, and I think there was a lot of discussion about what the solution to that is.
What is the potential solution? Because Middlesex are in a unique situation because they don't own their own ground. They're basically tenants, aren't they, for large parts of the year, because the MCC own Lords and run it, and Middlesex play some of their matches there, not all of their home matches there. So what's this kind of like fundamental problem, and what is a potential solution?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, as you said, Middlesex don't own Lords, they are just tenants. And what you look at, if you look at the county finances of other counties now, a lot of them are now making quite a lot of extra money on external events and activities, commercial activities, or rock concerts, or corporate events, and so on, and obviously building hotels on grounds and things like that. And Middlesex are not able to do any of that, so they are seriously dependent. And I'll put this on my blog on the Crickverse as well. There's a nice graphic which displays this. They are seriously dependent on ECB money. So the money that's shared to all the counties from receipts from broadcast rights and so on, that the ECB dish out to all the counties. Middlesex are more dependent on that money than any other county. 62% of their revenue is ECB derived. Compare that with Surrey, 6% of ECB revenue is in their balance sheet. So they make a lot more money from their commercial activities. The average for counties is 27% of ECB revenue as part of the whole. And, one or two other counties, Lancashire, Warwickshire, much less dependent on ECB revenue. Middlesex are in a very vulnerable position because the ECB revenue that is going to be shared out is projected to decline, or at least not rise, on the next broadcast deal. The next broadcast deal with whoever will buy the rights to English cricket is scheduled for 2028. And the general projections around the world on media rights is that they've sort of peaked, and that now they're going to perhaps start to come down a bit because, broadcasters like Sky or ESPN or whoever it is, TNT, they don't want to pay as much for the rights as they did, because of the sort of way that now coverage is so fragmented. You can get highlights, and social media and so on is rather diluting their exclusivity. So they're probably going to pay less next time, which means Middlesex will get less money out of the share, and therefore leaves them more vulnerable to getting into financial problems.
Okay, so they've got these problems. What's the solution? Because I mean, they've always played at Lords, haven't they? Well, as long as I can remember, anyway.
Yeah,
And they've been
150
successful in the
years.
past. They've been successful in the past. We talked about all those titles they've won. 13 titles overall, 2 shared, and they are the third most successful county. Yeah, so they've been successful in the past. Why can't they be successful with that model? Just very briefly, why can't they
I
be
think
successful?
the costs have risen, costs across the board have risen, but income hasn't risen in parallel. And So, and they're playing less at Lords this year than anywhere. And sorry, they're playing less at Lords this year than any other year because of the sort of things like Women's T20 World Cup and so on, that, where Lords is being kind of used for that. So Middlesex have less call on Lords this year. So it means they've got to go play on outgrounds, and that is expensive to set up. And remember last year, I think it was, they played 2 T20 games at Chelmsford because it's cheaper to go there than set up at Merchant Taylors or Radlett or somewhere like that. So, that's a kind of an absolutely farcical situation. Um, so, in the end, the solution is they need a home away from home. They need a ground and a premises that they can call their own, they can play at, they can train at, they can use it for other events as well, maybe corporate events or six-a-sides or football, whatever it is, so they can use that land for other things. And the only way they can do that is by getting outside investment, because at the moment there isn't any money in the budget to buy a new ground. So what they're talking about doing is something called demutualization, which basically is taking a members orientated club and enabling outside investment into that club. And Middlesex is member owned. So the 7,000 members all have a £1 share in the club, but it will need 50% of them to agree to allow outside investment, which will take, a while to convince the members and to set up the sort of legal framework for. But it's the only way that Middlesex can invest in the future is by getting outside investment to ultimately find a ground that they can call their own. And it doesn't mean they won't play at Lords. They'll still play at Lords, but they have another home they can really develop for the future.
So a couple of things here. One, that you've lived in London all your life. I've lived in London for quite a long time now, 40 years. Everyone knows London's property prices are vast. So are we talking about an insurmountable amount of money here? And so what about the money from the 100 sell-off?
Yeah.
Would that not help them?
Well, the money from the 100 sell-off is 24 million to Middlesex. A lot of counties are getting about that. The non-host counties in the 100 are getting about 20 odd million each. But that money is sort of gradually coming out. It's not come out in one great big lump sum, and it is ring fenced. You can't spend it on playing staff or administrative staff. You can spend it on projects that will encourage sustainable development. You can spend it on things like pathways. I'm not sure actually if you can spend it on developing a new ground. You probably can, but 24 million is not going to buy a new ground in London. So they're going to need a lot more than that. It's difficult to say how much, but I mean, it's a shame because, funnily enough, the place I used to train all the time, Barclays Bank Ealing, is a sports club there, and it's just fallen into disrepair. And it's a lovely spot. It's quite big. We used to go training there and do pre-season and stuff. And it's just a sort of derelict now. And it's a lovely piece of land, very close to Ealing Broadway Station. So great access to the Elizabeth line and all the other train lines and so on. It'd be perfect, but they haven't been able to cement or, kind of nail down a plot of land or a site which would be ideal for this as yet.
So let's just round this up then. So the demutualization, would that mean that the members are no longer in control of the club? Basically, you have private ownership of the club that would draw in investment, then go to build a ground, and it would be a privately owned club in the same way that Hampshire are now owned by the team,
Delhi Capitals
the
owners,
organisation that owns the Delhi Capitals.
yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? So
Well,
no longer be a members owned club?
Well, I think this is what the members are nervous about, is handing total ownership and control to some external investor. That isn't necessarily what's on the table. I think it's more about finding an external investor or company that will take a 25% share or 30% share or something, so in the club, and invest the money and obviously take some of the profits, but not dominate. And the experiences of the three counties that are externally owned or partly owned, Northants, Durham and Hampshire, is reasonably good. I mean, Hampshire managed their sale very well. I mean, firstly, Rob Bansgrove bailed the club out for a long time, but then now that ownership has passed on to the GMR Group that owned the Delhi Capitals in the IPL. Northants were kind of they managed to recruit quite a lot of outside investment and also encourage the members to buy shares in the club. Durham seems to have worked pretty seamlessly with their external investments. So I don't think the members should worry too much. I think that the Richard Sykes, the chairman, we'll get him on to the podcast at some point actually to talk about this because he'd explain it better than me. But I think he has sort of soothed the febrile potential or kind of reaction to this idea. And I think it's a model that other counties need to look at as well, because, like in Sussex, where I was on Monday talking to Paul Farbrace about their financial problems and having to cut the playing staff after this year because, they just haven't got the money to afford a staff they have got. It's going to apply to a lot of counties. And in fact, he said, didn't he, that the non-100 host counties the sort of financial differences between those and the host counties is going to grow unless there are clever ways like this of getting outside investment. A county cannot survive on membership subscriptions. A member pays, I don't know, 250 quid a year. There's 7,000 of them. It doesn't scratch the surface for the costs of running a club. So Middlesex, I know their revenue is about 7 million, and their expenditure is about 8 million or round about that. So, you can see that members' subscriptions are just a tiny little sort of slice of the pie. Counties cannot survive on that and the ECB income.
Oh, well, watch his space then, as far as Middlesex is concerned, and what happens there. Obviously, there have been quite a few problems behind the scenes on the field as well. They made actually a terrible start to the season. Gloucestershire are nicely offered up as lambs to the slaughter for the opening game of the season. Right, I tell you, we'll take a break, and after the break, we'll talk about, or go on to talk about substitutions, but we'll also talk about that Ben Stokes interview. Okay, so the ECB website this week released an interview with England captain Ben Stokes, quite a wide-ranging interview, lasts about half an hour. Go to the ECB website to listen to it. We're going to just play you a small extract from it in just a moment. Basically, Ben Stokes talking about what happened over the winter, his relationship with Brendan McCullum, how he sees the future. I thought to pick out a couple of things. One thing that really struck me was when he was asked about kind of England's approach to the future. And he said when he first came in and Brendan McCullum first came in, they wanted to bring back the enjoyment. That was their goal, bring back the enjoyment in playing for England. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of defeats. Let's get the enjoyment back. Now, he says, everything we do is to win, which is, it feels a strange thing to say in an odd way. I kind of know what he means. You can remember how England were 4 years ago, where they were a really low ebb. We just lost in the West Indies, and McCullum came in and Stokes came in, and it was fun to watch England. And then you kind of want them to move on, and you want them to be successful. England supporters want them to be successful, and what they want is for them to win an Ashes series. Well, win an Ashes series, full stop, but also win an Ashes series in Australia. And they went to Australia, and we know what happened there. So it does seem an odd thing to say that now the focus is everything we do is to win, is what Stokes is saying. The other thing as well, which I sort of got from the interview, is we don't need to play in one mode. And I think that is a reference to that sort of ultra aggressive, positive way. You play how you play, was one of his quotes. Joe Root plays differently to Harry Brook. And actually, we've seen that from Joe Root anyway. Joe Root, I think, changed. That Bumrah dismissal where he reverse swept him in that series in India, he just sensed there was a different Joe Root after that. Joe Root said, right, I'm just going to play the way I play. And that's been successful. And I think all England supporters want Joe Root to play in that way. What else was there in the interview? Where he talked about his facial injury, saying it could have been much worse. It was obviously pretty serious. It set him back for 5 weeks in his preparation for the new season. If his head had been in a slightly different place or struck in a slightly different place, then it could have been far worse. Doesn't really bear thinking about. He also and this is the extract we're going to hear. He also talked about the criticism of the England team after their Ashes performances and what happened on and off the field. And this is what he had to say about that.
I'm not going to sit here and say it's all out of order, it's all out of line. 100% think that a lot of it was warranted. A lot of it was almost put forward in a way that I think was a bit extreme. But I think when you look at it deep, you agree with some of it. But then I also think that some of it was a bit harsh and a bit unneeded, and it was like the knives are out, everyone's going to be coming in there. And again, that's something that you've just got to take, because when you have when you play the sport that we play and you have people who are passionate about England doing well, people who want to see England do well, they're going to be disappointed when we put in a performance like that over a long period of time. So it's one of those, like, you just got to take a few bullets for now and understand that disappointment shows itself in many different ways. But yeah, we've got ourselves to blame for a lot of it. We've got ourselves a lot to blame for the reaction that we received from the back end of Australia. And if you can't take that and aren't willing to understand that and sort of maybe listen to a little bit of it, and take that forward with your thought process to how we're going to get better and what we're going to do in the future, then we wouldn't see any progression. So it's some of it you sort of agree with, some of it sort of feels like it's just being said because it's the narrative that's running around at the moment. But interesting couple of months. Certainly feel like as I said, the knives have been out. But again, you got to take it, because performing like we did in Australia is disappointing to a lot of people, and actually I would also say it's sort of, I feel like it's a word like unacceptable for us to perform that way would be close, because we're a much better team than that.
So on the criticism, it's clear from listening to Ben Stokes there that he understands that England's performance in Australia, there's a big build-up, series of our lives, that it was unacceptable. I think there's also that feeling that they feel some of the criticism has gone too far. What do you say to that, Yoz?
I mean, the trouble is you do get people jumping on the bandwagon a bit, don't you, at times? And, you one or two people stick their neck out and say, oh, England were woeful. And then other people get confident and say the same thing. And it becomes a bit of a sort of bandwagon. I mean, look, there have always been criticisms of players if they haven't performed well. And criticism is justified. It's part of the job when you're playing professional sport. You have to take it on the chin. In a way, you have to be able to deal with that, and that's probably what separates the men from the boys in many cases. How you deal with the criticism. It's how you deal with failure, really. And you've got to be kind of authentic and true to yourself, I suppose. But I don't mind players feeling slightly riled by criticism. That's fine. Maybe they'll perform better as a result. Paul Varbus was saying when we did this interview with him the other day at Sussex, saying, players have it difficult now because social media sort of almost amplifies all the criticisms, and they sit there reading the negative stuff. Or, people that see players behind the scenes footage or interviews so much, people begin to think they know that player, and they can go up to them and say, what sort of shot was that? I think that was always the case, though. We didn't have social media in the 1980s and 90s, but still people said to you, that was a shit shot, or what sort of bowling was that today? Or I remember one particular journalist, a Telegraph journalist, Peter Dealey, who was a very good writer. I was to get it in the neck from him about poor bowling or being a journeyman or, lackluster or something. And I was always trying hard. But I felt at times it was a bit personal, but so it's always been the case. You have to rise above it, but if you want to use it as motivation, I think that's also fine.
You say you always tried hard, though, Yoz. But I mean, look, you come on this podcast, and you've written in your book about times when you turned up late for a Sunday league match with no kit. You said you fell asleep on the boundary edge after a night with Ian Botham, and not literally a night with Ian Botham, but a night of perhaps revelry in terms of perhaps drinking too much with Ian Botham. You turned up late for a Lord's final because you didn't realise the Notting Hill Carnival was on. So aren't those criticisms justified? So what I'm saying is that you feel like, oh, the journalist is having a go at me, but actually, if those criticisms are justified, then actually you need to look at yourself. And I think actually Ben Stokes was saying a bit of that in that interview, wasn't he? We do need to look at ourselves. That you do need to look at yourself and say, perhaps I do need to amend my behaviour. I don't know, turn up a couple of hours early and without loads of alcohol in my blood, for example.
No, I totally agree with you. But you get wise when you get old, don't you? And you know what you should have done. At the time, you can't see the wood for the trees, or life's a bit blurred. Of course, they're right, but I mean, luckily, a lot of that stuff didn't come out in those days. The writers wrote about the game. If they'd known how you actually behaved off the field, then they would have really got stuck into you. But they had justification for criticising you because you were poor on the field. I mean, I took it on board that I didn't give myself the best chance, and my father didn't speak to me for 3 days sometimes because he knew what was going on behind the scenes and the lack of discipline, and it's, in fact, totally valid criticisms.
What do you make of Ben Stokes' comment that now everything we do is to win? That's a direct quote. Everything we do is to win.
Well, I think that's right. And
but what I'm saying is shouldn't that have been the case
before? Yes,
beforehand?
absolutely. I mean, especially for the Ashes. The Ashes is massive, isn't it? And the only thing to do in the Ashes is to win them. And I remember canvassing opinion in a Lord's dinner one night about a year ago, perhaps the height of Bazball, or when the decline had started, perhaps. And I said to the audience of 200-300 people, do you want to win or do you want to be entertained? I mean, I know it shouldn't be sort of a separate argument. You should be able to do both. But, in this particular case, I said, do you want to win or do you want to be entertained? And 90% of the vote was, we want to win, even if we win in an ugly way. It just makes you feel better about yourself. And I mean, this disconnect between county cricket and England cricket, which has clearly hampered the whole kind of progress. It's important to get that liaison, right, because I remember when England kept getting beaten by the West Indies in the 1980s, when we were professional cricketers, we took pride in England's performances because we were all part of the fabric of the game. And if we kept getting hammered by the West Indies, we felt less about ourselves as a game. And so that's another good reason why, England should win, because it makes every county professional feel better about the game they're involved in.
And Stokes was also talking about his relationship with Brendan McCullum, saying that we agree 95% of the time. Look, I think, just reading between the lines, I think there was clearly in Australia some disagreement somewhere along the line. I mean, we all witnessed Ben Stokes' innings at Brisbane, where he came out and basically blocked it for, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, which was kind of look. He'd often play cautiously at the start of his innings anyway. Not the start of the Bazball era where he just came out and tried to whack it and set an example for his team, but he did play quite defensive. But that was like ultra defensive. Now the point about that is, and he says that in the interview that you're not going to agree the whole time, and that so inevitably there's going to be disagreements at times. So I don't think, and he was asked in his press conference in Sydney about kind of alignment with Brendan McCullum. There was a bit of equivocation there. I thought, oh, that's interesting, whether they've had some kind of falling out. But even if they had, then it seems as if it might have been relatively minor, not a huge deal. Look, you have Emma. I'm sure you have disagreements with her from time to time. I've been married for however long. Many odd years, and it's fair to say we have the odd disagreement from time to time.
Here, a shouting at you through the back door half the time.
It's kind of inevitable, isn't it? Perhaps not read too much into that this alignment thing, but I mean, but do they have slightly different philosophies? So Brendan McCullum is kind of like, look, Ben Stokes now, like that kind of like hard nosed wanting to win. Brendan McCullum freeing up the mind, freeing up the player to play in that kind of relaxed way, which was part of England's strategy, wasn't it, in the first couple of years? But I sort of sense now from Stokes, just right, come on, hard nosed now, everything focused on winning.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, Brendan McCullum is basically sort of laissez-faire sort of character, isn't he? And I don't feel that he feels the emotional necessity to change necessarily. He's living abroad. You know, he lives in New Zealand. I mean, Nick Compton made that point. How can we have a full-time England coach who doesn't even live here? And he's not coming back to England until a couple of weeks before the first test. So in a way, that's a good thing for him because he's detached from, you know, the sort of criticisms or the media kind of bandwagon, if you like. Obviously, he can keep in touch with it, but it's not there quite so close at home. Whereas Ben, you know, is got it every day. You know, he walks down the road and goes to the village shop. You know, there'll be someone might say something, or you know, there'll be someone at Durham when he's training or whatever. You know, you can't escape the kind of negativity that people felt after the Ashes. And so I'm sure he, you know, he feels compelled, as a sort of, I was going to say true blue Englishman. I mean, obviously he was born in New Zealand as well, but you sort of feel he's kind of really, you know, bought into the sort of English fabric and lifestyle and approach to life. And, you know, he wants to do something about it, and he wants people to be proud of England. And he knows that the only way for them to be proud is to win. So he's driven in a way to try and show the way forward. And you know, that philosophy between him and McCullum, it is a bit different, but that's okay. I mean, you know, they can have slightly different views on approaches. It doesn't have to be perfectly aligned. You know, teams I played in, you know, there was lots of disagreement about stuff, but in the end, we all aligned on wanting to win. And that, I think he's realized that is the key word. I mean, it sounds tautological, doesn't it? And we all thought that they would think that before the Ashes, but clearly they didn't.
Well, possibly. I mean, perhaps the all for winning was there before they went to the Ashes, but the preparation, all sorts of things surrounding it weren't quite in the right place. And you've also got to take down your opponent as well. They're trying to stop you the whole time as well. So there's that interview on the ECB website. If you want to listen to all of it, you can go there and find it. It's around about half an hour in length. We're going to take another quick break, and then after that, we're going to conclude this podcast by talking about substitutions, to do or not to do. Okay, we're going to finish off today by talking about the issue of substitutions in county cricket. We started off with a quiz question, Yoz, of this podcast today, the Bobby Charlton question. Arnie Sidebottom, the answer. When was the first substitution in a World Cup match, Football World Cup match? In what year do you think that happened?
1950.
1950. Okay. The answer is 1970 in the World Cup of 1970. Therefore, when do you think was the first substitute used in the Football League in England?
1936.
Okay. This is not going well.
So they played 11 players despite the fact that somebody limped off injured. They didn't substitute them.
Yeah, that's right. Until 1965, I think the rule was changed in 58, but internationally. But 1965 was the first time a substitution was used in a Football League game. It was Keith Peacock, was a goalkeeper, I think, came on as a substitute for an injured goalkeeper. The point being that before then, you know, you'd have famously Bert Troutman, the Manchester City goalkeeper, broke his neck in an FA Cup final and played on. So, and sometimes you find in those big finals, because the Wembley pitch was very sapping, you'd have players kind of like standing on the touchline, injured but still sort of part of the action. And then eventually people thought, we need to do something about this. Rugby Union International, the first time, officially, I think there was a substitution in a Rugby Union International was 1968. Okay, the point being,
I should just say with rugby, I mean, it's become it was essential, hasn't it? I mean, replacements in rugby are in a way, if your bench isn't very good, you're never going to win, because it's almost like a sort of complete substitution of the whole team practically. I mean, I know there are limits, but sometimes the whole front row gets replaced and so on. I mean, it's amazing. I suppose it borrows a bit from NFL, doesn't it? Where you've got attackers and defenders, and then that guy comes on just to kick a goal and things. I mean, sort of almost people have separate roles, and half the team are off the field half the game.
Yeah. Okay, so my point being that in football and rugby, substitutions have been in for, since the 60s. Yeah. In cricket, of course, there have been substitutions for fielders, for injured fielders. So that's been in as long as in my lifetime. You might be able to tell me from your historical research when sub fielders were allowed in cricket. Perhaps it's always happened. I don't know, because the feeling is you shouldn't play, with 10 fielders, or a wicket keeper, bowler, and 8 fielders. So there have been substitutes in cricket, but not batters or bowlers. So is cricket special? So why is it that we have such antipathy? Why is there such a kind of reaction to the fact that players have been substituted this season in the county championship? Of course, we've had concussion substitutes for a while, but now injured players. And the classic one in that last round of matches was that game at Trent Bridge, where who was it went off? Hold on. I think it's on there. Where Fergus O'Neill of Nottinghamshire went off injured on the final day and was replaced by Lyndon James, who picked up a couple of wickets. And Glamorgan was saying that nothing about Nottinghamshire, kind of, we would have done the same thing, but is this fair that you get a fresh bowler coming in on the 4th day to then take a couple of weeks? They actually wanted to use Ollie Stone, but the match referee said this is not like for like. To have Ollie Stone, because he's a fast bowler and Fergus O'Neill was medium fast, and Lyndon James was more of a kind of a like-for-like cricketer.
What about another well-known example recently? Somerset-Essex game, where a Somerset player got injured at Chelmsford, and Will Smead, who'd been batting for Somerset against another county's second 11 at Abergavenny, and had made a century and a double century in the same game, he was called in from Abergavenny and had to travel 200 miles to Chelmsford to take his place in the Somerset batting order, and ended up, I think, batting at number 8. They had to open with Jack Leach, who mentioned it in a previous podcast. So that was a completely absurd situation. They could have put in Archie Vaughan instead, but they decided to go with Will Smead.
Well, Archie Vaughan got into the game later on
as well.
Lewis Goldsworthy was injured and then knocked off the winning runs. I think the point is about the Fergus O'Neill substitution and Lyndon James coming in. So you basically got a fresh bowler coming in on the 4th day of a match where everyone has slogged through it. And cricket traditions would say, well, this feels wrong because it's a test. A 4-day game is a test. A 5-day test match is a test. But then people who are in favour of substitutions will say, what about the absurd Chris Wokes situation at Lords at the Oval last year, when he was out of the game early on and basically had to play for the rest of the match with 10. But the point being, in other sports now, we're so used to players who are injured late on in the game and a fresh player coming on, especially in rugby union, fresh players coming on in the last 20 minutes when players have slogged their way through 60 minutes of hardcore rugby, especially at international level, which is very fierce. Why is it cricket has such an opposition, it seems, to substitutions? Why is it seen as kind of almost unfair play?
Well, I think you alluded to it a bit by saying, cricket is a longer game and it is about fitness and ability. And
so is rugby and football. They're intense games.
They're more kind of intense sports, aren't they? With more speed and pace is probably more important in rugby and football. I mean, I know you need perseverance and resilience as well, but
and fitness.
Yeah, I mean, resilience is such a big thing in cricket, isn't it? And I mean, the trouble with substitutes is two things. One, it is open to abuse. And it has been sort of a little bit abused, I think, because a couple of players have limped off with a modest injury, knowing that there's no game in a week's time, so they could get a substitute and not miss a game because there's no match for a week or so. And the other problem, I think, with cricket particularly is, it's not a rich sport, and therefore it can't really afford to have lots of players hanging around on the sidelines in case there is an injury. There are Sussex the other day, Paul Farber saying they've got 4 fit bowlers. They haven't got anybody else to stand by in case there's an injury. And it's also would be very frustrating for players to be sat there for 4 days not playing cricket just in case there's an injury as well. They could be playing for the second 11 or for their club or whatever. So, I mean, cricket is a unique game, particularly because it's such a long game, and it is survival of the fittest as much as it is the survival of the skillest. I mean, what do you think?
I'm kind of making up my mind, but I've always found it a bit odd that cricket is so resistant to substitutes, basically, because it's like, what I kind of like, why? I know there's that thing, one of the skills of a captain is to pick the right team at the toss or just before the toss or in the lead up to the game, and that's kind of a skill, and then you have to go with it, and you have to sort of manage your troops, if you like, over 3, 4, or 5 days. But how is that any different from a rugby union coach or a football coach who has to pick their best 11 or 15 for the start of a match, or a rugby league game for the start of a match, to find the right strategy, the right energy levels, the right skill sets? It just seems a bit odd to me. That's all. That cricket is so resistant to it, and it feels like, again, it comes down to this thing. It's not quite cricket. So basically, I also think cricket it's got wonderful double standards where it's wrong. It's wrong to bring in a bowler for an injured bowler on the 4th day. That's just not cricket. And yeah, it's perfectly okay to hit the cover off it and stand there and get away with when you're out, and nick it to the keeper. That's perfectly okay. It just seems peculiar to me that we have those kind of double standards. I can see the argument. I can see it from both sides. But what are the potential solutions? Well, it looks as if the ECB are going to look at tightening things up. So, I mean, one thing, and actually this is something I thought they could do, and I didn't actually realise that this is what they did in Australia, was you could have no substitutions after the 2nd day. So an early injury in the match, you can bring someone in, but then you can see lots of games where if you did that, where players might limp off with about half an hour left or 15 minutes left of the 2nd day, and perhaps bring in a fresh bowler. I mean, look, you were a professional sportsman, Yoz. You guys, you will always try to find ways around the rules. You'll push it to the limit, whatever rules, laws, or whatever that are there. You will try to exploit those to your maximum benefit, won't you? If you're a bowler and you bowl one and you have a big shag for LBW, you probably know it's not out, and then the umpire gives it out before DRS or in a county match. How often would you go up to the umpire and say, "No, I don't think he hit that"? No, you just go. You're kind of exploiting the umpire's inability to have a replay, or whatever, the fallible human judgment.
I mean, it's never going to be a perfect solution.
No.
I do agree with you that, if someone has got a bad injury, like a Chris Woakes, for instance, you should have a substitute. And maybe you could do it after 2 innings. If it's a 4-day game or 4-inning game, you could do it after 2 innings and not after the second. Once you come to the 3rd innings of the match, you can't have a substitute anymore. But even that's a bit arbitrary. It's hard to pin it down. I mean, what it was originally designed, wasn't it, to really replace a player who had to leave the ground for the birth of a child or the death of a parent or something like that, something kind of quite tragic or kind of life changing, rather than a hamstring injury. It does need a bit of tinkering with, for sure. And I don't know what the best solution is. I do agree that you should have substitutes because people pay good money to watch a proper game of cricket. And, if one team's down by, a key bowler, then they've only got 10 men and, that person can't bat either, then it does seriously handicap.
So this is my point. It's like this idea of a late substitution. So what? So, so Ferguson O'Neill goes off, Lyndon James comes on. Why couldn't Glamorgan sub in a top order batter for a tail ender, on the last day as they were batting for victory. It's kind of like part of the game in the same way that football and rugby does the same thing. You can have injury subs, you can have tactical subs, and I think cricket's gone this route of having subs for players who are illness or whatever in their family or whatever. Why not? Why not? What's so wrong with a free for all? Why is it so anathema to the game? All these other sports were doing it 60 years ago. Why is it cricket is so resistant to it? Does it not just add a different dimension? It just changes the game slightly. People are so wedded to this idea. Oh, I picked my 11, therefore we stick with it. Whatever, we might all fall in the heat. We might have 8 fit players by the end, but that's my man, and we're going to go for it. I find that sort of viewpoint. I kind of find myself questioning it and wondering, what is it? Is it kind of fit for purpose in the modern age, especially where the game is so much more it feels it's so much more intense now.
I mean,
than it was.
certainly that applies to rugby, doesn't it? That you do kind of see a complete change of personnel after about 60 minutes of a rugby match. People have got used to that now. I mean, it seemed odd to start with that the number 9 was replaced by a number 23 and stuff, but I guess it does keep the spectacle going, doesn't it? It makes, rather than just watching kind of very tired prop forwards staggering up and down the field, you've got kind of a couple of guys who can still run, pretty sprightly. So I guess it's it's supposed to be an entertainment as well as a sport, if you like. And you if you pay 150 quid for a test match or county match or whatever, obviously less for a county match, you're entitled to expect high quality.
Yeah, look, the Six Nations Championship that's just finished, that had 8 substitutions per team, and everyone said it was the best Six Nations Championship there's ever been. So it doesn't mean that just because you have all these subs coming on, it ruins the game. I mean, it was absolutely fabulous entertainment all around. So I just wonder whether it's kind of like a mindset thing that people are so opposed to it. But I sort of wonder whether we should just free our minds and say, well, let's have tactical substitutions as well. And they have that, of course, they have that in the IPL. I wonder whether it's kind of reaction to that you don't want them in the IPL. Look, if we're going to have solutions, if people say that it's not acceptable, and I'm perfectly open to having my mind changed on this. I don't feel dogmatic about it, but I just kind of wonder why we're so opposed to it. If we are going to bring in some sort of harder regulations, I think we could have a first 2 innings of the game or first 2 days of the match and no substitutions. They do have the like for like rule, so that's quite firm as well. That's why we didn't see Ollie Stone coming in for Ferguson because it wasn't deemed like for like. So those are the things that I think they could do. The other thing they could just say, right, every team can have 2 subs, or every team can just have 1 sub, and that's it. You can use them for injuries, whatever, tactical replacements.
Would you say, what about actually nominating 12 players and the 11 go out on the field and the 12th man can play if there's an injury, but he's nominated, even if the bowler's injured, he's a batter, that he's still the guy who comes in. Yeah, but that might make it a bit more simple than having to have a like for like replacement. And I know that could be abused as well, but I think one of the problems with the domestic game is just having all these players, sort of waiting on tenterhooks in case they're needed, or having to draft someone in from 200 miles away. It's not very logistically workable, is it?
No, I mean look, with any regulation, there's always going to be loopholes. There's always going to be what ifs. The other thing that's been it feels as if it's been abused in inverted commas is the fact that some counties, because of the 8-day rule, you can't play within 8 days of being substituted. Of course, there have been a few counties who didn't have a game for more than 8 days.
There's only 4 games, I think, this weekend, isn't there?
So it could be that if you wanted to tighten it up, you had the first 2 innings and you couldn't play the next match or the next first class match. But what do you do? What do you do at the end of the season if it's the last game of the season and you're going for a title? So that's the problem, isn't it? Rule would not have any effect on that. Not playing the next game. it would roll over to the next season. But, well, anyway, look, they're going to they are look as if they're going to look at the rules and tighten it up a bit. I'll be interested to see what they come up with.
Interesting to see how this evolves anyway, and whether counties still utilise all sorts of substitutes. I'm going to find out immediately if that's the case, because I'm going down to the Utilita Bowl to watch Hampshire play the County Championship Division 1 leaders Somerset over the weekend, and I'll report back from that game. And I'm sure, Simon, you're going to be keeping an eye on all the matches going on as well.
Absolutely, yeah. 2 screens, 3 screens, 4 screens, whatever, open on watching all the championship action. That's one of the things we disagree over, yours. But as we said earlier, you can have disagreements, but you can still be aligned. Thanks for listening, everyone. Goodbye for now.